Well, how'd you do, gang? Thank you for taking the time to be here. Welcome to Ferro Woodcraft. My name is Joe. It is awesome to see you. Well, what I want to talk to you about today is a part of my journey, so to speak, into the whole bushcrafting thing, however you want to label the type of activities that we do out in the woods or in our backyards or whatnot. What I want to talk to you today is about my learning process with a ferro rod specifically. This video obviously is labeled top 4 points of failure with a ferro rod. There's a couple of caveats with that. Number one, you probably can squish these down into the top 2, mix 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, but I find lists like these are easier to follow along if you break them down into as minute of pieces as possible. Also, just to clarify, I am not setting myself up as an expert here in any way, shape, or form. I receive a lot of comments, some questions on my use with a ferro rod, specifically the successes with a ferro rod, and so I thought I would go ahead and take a few minutes here and just explain what I have learned over the years and the times that I have failed and the recipe for the successes that I have had in the past. Before we get into the actual list, one thing I want to point out, clarify, really focus on for just a quick second is without practice, none of these points will ever hit home. You can take these points, put it in your head, kind of put it in your toolbox, and until you actually go to apply them and practice them, it's probably, I mean, it may make sense in your head, but it's not gonna, you won't own those particular points or skills. Anyway, that being said, practice, practice, practice. All right, point number 4 is focusing only on your peripherals. These are some examples of peripherals. It's just the ferro rods. It's the tools that you use or the scrapers that you use with the ferro rod, focusing on those as your point of failure. If you're not getting a fire with your ferro rod, don't focus solely on your ferro rod, because more than likely it is not your point of failure. That will make more sense as we get further on into this list. But focusing at the ferro rod or the scraper you're using, the tool that you're using, as why you're not getting a fire going is probably not where to start. It very well could be, but more than likely it is not where the failure is actually occurring. It might be a contributing factor, but it's not going to be the majority of the issue. Moving on into number 3, and it is also very closely tied to number 4, is ineffectual use of your ferro rod. This is also something you really don't need to be focusing on too much, because as you practice with whatever type of fire steel or whatever type of scraper you use, it will start to make more sense in the technique behind using that particular ferro rod, and more so the technique. When I say ineffectual use, is basically just holding the ferro rod too far away from whatever you're trying to light on fire, whether it be grass, bark, feathers from a feather stick, something like that. The number 1 point of failure I see as far as ineffectual use of the peripherals or your tools is just simply holding the ferro rod too far away to be effective in imparting enough heat into the tinder to actually get it lit on fire. Moving on into number 2 and taking the focus away from the tools, which is where the focus really needs to be, is in your resources. Number 2 is know your resources. Unfortunately, unless you live in Western North Carolina, in my little area, because Western North Carolina has a wide variety of environments and resources available depending on where you are in Western North Carolina. Unless you're in my specific area, I can't give you a list of this works great, this doesn't work well, this works okay. You know, I can't help you there. This is going to be something that you're going to have to go out in your neck of the woods, find people who are more knowledgeable in your area and learn from them. I can conjecture, you can tell me what kind of wood you're using, what kind of plant you're using. I can conjecture about your area, but unless I have specific knowledge of whatever it is you're trying to use, I can't tell you. I can tell you just a couple quick examples in my area of what I'm talking about. Poplar is an awesome fire starter. It loves to feather. It shaves down nice and fine, nice curlicues. It takes a spark readily. It really likes to burn. Its bark you can crumble up, and it has very fine fibers in there. It's really easy to crumble it up into an effective bird's nest to accept a spark from your ferro rod. And also the wood itself, you take a 90-degree spine or even put the edge of your knife at a 90-degree angle to the wood itself. You can create some nice dust for another way to accept a spark there. Poplar is just an excellent wood to work with. But flip the coin from that poplar. One example of something in my area that doesn't work so well but does still work is mimosa. Mimosa works great for a bow drill, but mimosa loves to smolder. It is very effective at smoldering. You can create a nice feather stick with it. You can light it on fire, but it doesn't burn very well. It takes some coaxing to get it to burn really well. So while it does work, it doesn't work nearly as well as poplar. Remember I said practice, practice, practice. This is something that I highly encourage you guys to get out in your area, your environment, find different resources, and if you're not familiar with them, just experiment. You know, create a quick feather stick, touch it with a Bic lighter and see how it burns. Before you go to all the trouble of burning up your ferro rod trying to get it lit, see how it reacts to a Bic lighter. That will give you a good idea. Using a Bic lighter is never cheating, so don't worry about that. If you're wanting to learn, just practice and experiment. No matter how much book reading you do, how much book learning you do, until you get out and actually apply what head knowledge you have, you will never own the skill or own the knowledge of applying that into the real world. And finally, number one, the number one point of failure that I learned through my learning experience, and guys, I'm still learning. I'm not an expert here. I'm not claiming to be whatsoever. The number one point of failure that I have found is not proper preparation of your fuel or your resources. Knowing your resources goes a long way into finding success, but until you know how to properly prepare those resources, success will always be elusive. Folks, I apologize for the constant moving of the camera angle here. The sun's really causing problems with the glare in my lens. Anyway, let's flesh out point number one a little bit. What do I mean by properly preparing your fuel to burn? Before we do that, let's go over just a little bit. What does it take to get something to burn? A common teaching tool or common phrase that a lot of teachers out there use is, whether you're using bark or grasses or whatever, fluff it up, break it down, create more surface area. That is an excellent teaching tool, but what exactly does that mean? What does it do? Does it just create more surface area? No, not really. What it does is it thins out the fibers, it thins out the material. When you put a source of heat to it, it is small enough that it can't disperse that heat into its neighboring fibers or neighboring wood, neighboring feathers and stuff like that, that it can't disperse that heat out, so it has no choice but to combust or come to flame. So let's reverse that. If you don't have those really fine feathers, if you don't have that really broken up fibrous bark or grasses or whatnot, if it's not extremely fine, have more surface area, then there is more of wood or grass or whatnot in contact with the point where you're putting heat into it, that it's able to disperse that heat out more efficiently and not come to flame. So the whole point of those really fine feathers, the whole point of that having the bark broke down as much as possible, is so that you're easily able to overwhelm the surface area or overwhelm that material to the point where it can't disperse the heat that you're putting into it, and it forces it to combust. And it is that failure, not taking your fuel to that point to readily accept the spark, readily accept the heat to combust, that I've seen in my life, my journey in learning how to properly use a ferro rod, and that I've also seen in others. I'm not pointing any fingers. I do teach a couple, 3 classes every year with 4-H homeschool groups and stuff like that, and this is something that I see out in the real world from other people and on YouTube to a certain degree. Because I'm such a verbose guy, I'm sure this video is going to be longer than I originally intended. However, I do want to condense this down into 2 main points. Number one, preparing your fuel properly is the number one thing you can do to successfully achieve fire with a ferro rod or Bic lighter, basically anything that any method you're trying to start a fire. If you don't prepare that fuel properly, you're going to have a difficult time in getting it to light. And number two, and it is just as equal as number one, and it is very much a necessary part of number one, is practice, practice, practice. No one is an expert at starting a fire or any bushcraft or survival skill straight out of the gate. It takes practice. So that being said, guys, I apologize for any rambling I've done. If I have created questions in you guys, please feel free to hit me up privately or in the comment section. I don't mind questions at all. I enjoy interacting with you guys very much. Thank you very much for being here today, folks. If you've enjoyed this video, found it informative, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. I would appreciate that very much. If you're new to the channel and haven't done so yet, there's a red subscribe button right down here. If you enjoy videos like this, please make sure to make use of that. And also, folks, be sure to hit up the comments section. Ask me questions. Let's talk about this method. Just anything you guys want to talk about. Again, thank you very much for being here today. It's been a pleasure. I will see you next time. I hope you guys have a great day.